He arrived too late, or so he thought. The cameras showed the unthinkable. The Nannies had thrown his daughter onto the tracks of a moving train. Desperate, the millionaire raced against time. And what happened next was a true miracle. If you enjoy emotional stories, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Continuing. Chapter 1. Shadows of the Past. The pale morning light tried, unsuccessfully, to break through the heavy curtains of the office where Gregory Manning had spent another sleepless night. The clock read 6 when Mrs. Celia, the housekeeper who had worked with him for over 2 decades, knocked on the door with her 3 characteristic taps, 2 light ones followed by a firmer one. "Come in," he said, his voice hoarse from having spoken to no one but numbers, spreadsheets, and ghosts of the past for too long. "You didn't sleep again, sir." It wasn't a question. Mrs. Celia knew him far too well to ask questions to which she already knew the answer. "And little Laurie had a fever during the night. I think she's cutting another tooth." Gregory closed his eyes for a moment. His daughter, Laura, was only 9 months old, and ever since Patricia had been lost during childbirth, he had felt incapable of looking at the little girl's face without a sharp pain piercing his chest. It was as if every toothless smile, every curious glance was a living reminder of what he had lost. "Did you call Dr. Marcus?" he asked, rubbing his face with hands that trembled from exhaustion. "It wasn't necessary. I gave her the medicine he prescribed last time." "She slept well after that?" The grey-haired woman with hands marked by hard work sighed, placing a cup of strong coffee on the desk. "But that's not what we need to talk about, sir. It's about the girl." The businessman stood up, feeling his backache after hours bent over documents that now seemed irrelevant in the face of this inevitable conversation. "Mrs. Celia, I know what you're going to say, but—" "No, sir, you don't," she interrupted him with an authority that only years of familiarity allowed. "I'm getting too old to look after a baby. My joints ache. I get dizzy when I bend down too quickly. Your daughter deserves someone with more energy, someone who can run after her when she starts walking." The truth of her words hung heavy in the air between them. The textile empire Gregory had built over 15 years, transforming his father's small factory into one of the largest companies in the sector in New York, now seemed to be crumbling at the edges. Not because of the business, which remained profitable despite the economic crisis, but from within, from the emotional core that sustained everything. "And what do you suggest?" he asked, approaching the window to part the curtains slightly. Outside, Park Avenue was beginning to awaken to another frantic day. Cars, buses, people in a hurry, they all seemed to have a purpose, a direction. Everyone but him. "Your friend, Mr. Richard, told me he knows a reliable agency. They have foreign girls experienced in childcare, well qualified." Richard Alvarez, his partner from the beginning, when they were just 2 business students with dreams too big for their empty pockets. Richard, who had held his hand at the hospital when the doctor emerged from the operating room with that expression Gregory would never forget, the look of someone bearing the weight of news that would destroy a person. Richard, who had organized the funeral while he was sedated, unable to face reality. "He's already spoken to me about it," Gregory admitted, taking a sip of the strong, bitter coffee. "Said they were Filipina or Venezuelan, I don't quite remember." "Venezuelan," Mrs. Celia confirmed. 2 sisters who fled the crisis there. They speak Spanish, but they're already learning English. They're young, but they have references." Gregory felt the weight of the unavoidable decision. Little Laura couldn't continue to depend solely on Mrs. Celia and he. He simply couldn't do it. Every cry in the night, every changed diaper, every bottle was a cruel reminder that it should have been Patricia there, not him. Guilt consumed him from the inside, a silent cancer spreading day by day. "All right, ask Richard to arrange the paperwork, the interview, whatever is necessary." "Don't you want to be part of the process, sir?" the housekeeper asked, surprised. "I trust your judgment, Mrs. Celia, and Richard's." The woman nodded, but before leaving, she paused at the door and said with the frankness that only trusted long-time employees permit themselves, "One day, you're going to have to truly look at her. That little girl has her mother's eyes, but that stubborn streak is all yours." When the door closed, Gregory felt the silence of the room weigh like lead. He opened the desk drawer and took out the picture frame he kept hidden there. Patricia, with that smile that could light up any room, her belly just beginning to show signs of pregnancy. The photo had been taken in the Hamptons during the last weekend they had spent together before the complications of her pregnancy confined her to absolute bed rest. It was all for naught. The preeclampsia developed so severely and rapidly that not even the best doctors at Mount Sinai Hospital could reverse it. He had to choose, save his wife or the child. But there was no real choice. When he entered the operating room to see her one last time, Patricia was already unconscious. The doctor was saying something about blood pressure, placental abruption, internal bleeding. Words that floated around him without making sense. The phone rang, pulling him from those painful memories. It was Richard. "Morning, my friend. Heard the good news? Mrs. Celia just called me." His partner's cheerful voice contrasted with the somber atmosphere of the office. Richard had always been like that. Optimistic, energetic, full of plans. Sometimes Gregory wondered how two such different men had become such close friends. "If you call the fact that I can't take care of my own daughter good news, then yes," he replied dryly. A sigh on the other end of the line. "Gregory, don't start. It's been almost a year. You need to move on for Laura's sake and for your own." "Don't tell me what I need to do, Richard." The words came out harsher than he intended. "Sorry, just organize this, okay? I want it done quickly. Mrs. Celia really isn't in any condition to care for a baby." "It's all arranged. Carmen and Soledad Gonzalez, Venezuelan as I mentioned, 25 and 23, degrees in pedagogy from Venezuela, experience with children in vulnerable situations. Fled the crisis 2 years ago. They're legal in the country with work visas." Richard spoke as if he were reading a resume. "I can bring them both for an interview today, if you like." Gregory glanced at the pile of documents on his desk. Financial. Reports, contracts with new suppliers in China, the expansion project for the American South. Work that would require his full attention in the coming months. Fine, but ask Mrs. Celia to conduct the interview. I'll be busy with the investors' meeting. You need to meet them, Gregory. And I will, after they're hired. He ended the call before his friend could insist. That same afternoon, while Gregory presented financial projections to a group of Japanese executives interested in investing in the company's expansion, Carmen and Soledad Gonzalez arrived at the imposing apartment on the Upper East Side. The understated luxury of the place, with its contemporary art and furniture by famous designers, contrasted with the simplicity of the two young women, who carried only a folder of documents and nervous expressions. "Welcome," said Mrs. Celia, guiding them to the living room. "Would you like some coffee or tea?" "No, thank you," replied the older one, Carmen, in careful English with a strong Spanish accent. "We are eager to meet Senor Manning and little Laura." Mrs. Celia smiled, leading them to the sofa. "Mr. Gregory is in a meeting. As for Laurie, she's sleeping now after her fever last night, but we can talk and then I'll show you your room, should you be hired." As the housekeeper explained the household routine, the schedules, and the baby's specific needs, Richard watched the two sisters from a distance, leaning against the doorframe. There was something strange in the gaze of the younger one, Soledad, a mixture of fear and resignation that didn't fit with someone genuinely interested in caring for a child. "Do you mind if I ask a few questions?" Richard interrupted, walking into the room with his usual charm. The sisters exchanged a quick glance before nodding. "How did you find our agency?" he asked, sitting down across from them. Carmen hesitated for a moment. "It was through a friend, a fellow countryman. He said you helped qualified immigrants find good positions." Richard smiled, but his eyes remained cool. "And you have experience with babies this young?" "Yes, senor. In Caracas, I worked in a community daycare with children of all ages," Carmen answered confidently. "And Soledad has a degree in early childhood education." The younger sister just nodded, her eyes fixed on the floor. Richard noticed that her hands were trembling slightly. "You understand the special situation we have here, don't you?" he continued, leaning forward. "Mr. Manning lost his wife less than a year ago. His daughter is everything he has now. We need people who are not just qualified but committed, loyal." "We understand perfectly," Carmen assured him. "We also lost many family members in Venezuela. We know what pain is." Mrs. Celia, who had been observing the interaction attentively, intervened. "I think we can show them their room now, don't you, Mr. Richard? Mr. Gregory has made it clear he trusts our decision, and I like the young ladies." Richard stood up, adjusting his expensive suit. "Of course, Mrs. Celia. Show them the room, get them acquainted with the house. After all, if everything goes well, they'll be starting immediately." As they went up to the second floor of the duplex, Richard pulled out his phone and sent a quick message. "It's all set. They don't suspect a thing." Night had already fallen when Gregory finally arrived home. The meeting with the Japanese investors had run longer than expected, but the result was positive. A $50 million investment for the expansion of the factories in the South. It was the kind of news that a year ago would have made him rush home eager to celebrate with Patricia. Now it just meant more work, more responsibility, more reasons to stay away from this apartment filled with memories. The silence that greeted him was broken by a soft cry coming from Laura's room. He instinctively headed there, pausing at the half-open door. In the room decorated with fairies and unicorns, chosen by Patricia months before she died, a young woman was gently rocking Laura, singing a Spanish song he didn't recognize. Gregory stood there motionless, watching the scene. The little girl, usually restless with strangers, seemed peaceful in the young woman's arms. "Senor Manning," she said upon noticing his presence. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake you." "I just got here," he replied, still at the door, unsure of how to act. "You must be Carmen Gonzalez, senor. My sister Soledad is helping Mrs. Celia with dinner." Gregory nodded, watching how the young woman held Laura securely, yet delicately. There was something in her eyes, a familiar sadness perhaps, that made him feel a strange connection. "Is she all right?" "Mrs. Celia told me she had a fever. Yes, she's better now. Just the discomfort of her new teeth." Carmen smiled, adjusting the baby in her lap. "She has a strong spirit, this little one. Very observant for her age." Without realizing it, Gregory took a step forward, getting close enough to see his daughter's face. Laura looked at him with those eyes, Patricia's eyes, and for the first time in months he didn't feel the usual pain. Instead, a wave of protectiveness and tenderness washed over him. She was his daughter. Part of Patricia, yes, but also part of him. "Would you like to hold her?" Carmen offered gently. Gregory hesitated. I don't know how." "It's easy," she smiled, moving closer. "Here, support her little head like this. That's right." Before he could protest, Gregory found himself with his daughter in his arms, the small warm body against his chest, the curious gaze, the tiny fingers that soon found their way to his tie. Something broke inside him, a barrier he had kept up since that terrible night at the hospital. "Hello, little one," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Daddy's here." Carmen watched the scene with a mixture of emotion and guilt. She knew what was coming, what they had planned for this family already so devastated by tragedy. She glanced down the empty hallway, thinking of her sister downstairs, just as scared as she was, and of Eduardo Marquez, the man who had cornered them with debts and threats, the man who used the fake name Robert and who worked for this Richard. The plan was simple and terrible: gain the trust of the millionaire and everyone in the house, and then at the right moment disappear with the child. Per kidnapping disguised as a tragedy, the negligent nanny who let the baby fall into the pool, or who lost her during a walk in the park. Anything that would destroy Gregory Manning from the inside and, consequently, bring down the company that Richard coveted so much. But now, seeing father and daughter together, finally connected after so much suffering, Carmen felt the weight of her part in this macabre plan. Eduardo's threats against her family in Venezuela seemed distant in the face of the reality of this innocent child. "You have a beautiful voice," Gregory said suddenly, pulling her from her thoughts. "The song." It calmed her. "It's a Venezuelan lullaby," she explained, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. "My mother used to sing it to us. Your sister, she's quieter, isn't she?" he asked, still gently rocking Laura. Carmen hesitated. "Soledad has been through a lot. We lost our parents in Venezuela and then, well, we had to flee." "She's still adjusting." Gregory nodded, understanding. "I know what it's like to lose someone you love. It feels like the whole world is falling apart and you don't know how to go on." "But you are going on," Carmen observed softly, for her. Their eyes met for an instant, two souls marked by deep loss, brought together by fate under circumstances neither of them could have foreseen. The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Celia, who appeared at the door to announce that dinner was served. Gregory carefully handed Laura back to Carmen, feeling a strange emptiness as his daughter left his arms. "You'll be dining with us tonight," he said, "not as a request, but as a decision. We need to get to know each other better, since you'll be taking care of my most precious treasure." As they headed to the dining room, where Soledad and Richard were already waiting, Carmen felt the weight of her guilt increase. Gregory Manning was not the cold, distant businessman Eduardo had described. He was just a man broken by grief, trying to rebuild himself for his daughter. Richard watched the three of them approach with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The plan was in motion. Soon Gregory Manning would lose everything he had left, and Manning Textiles would finally be his, just as it should have been from the beginning. When Gregory's father chose his son to take over the company instead of him, the loyal partner who had dedicated his life to the business. "A toast to a new face," Richard proposed, raising his wine glass. "To the Manning family and its newest members." Everyone raised their glasses, but while the others drank, Carmen just stared at the dark liquid, thinking how dark the future looked for everyone at that table. Across from her, Soledad kept her eyes downcast, unable to look at the man who was unknowingly walking into a trap she would help set, unless she found the courage to do something she never had in her life, face her own fears and change the course of a destiny that seemed already written. That night, as rain began to fall over New York City, 4 lives intertwined in a web of secrets, pain, and possibilities. And in her crib, oblivious to the shadows forming around her, Laura slept peacefully, unaware that she would be the center of a storm that would forever change the lives of everyone in the house. Chapter 2. Invisible Ties. 3 months had passed since the Gonzalez sisters' arrival at the Manning residence. The New York autumn was showing its first signs, with cooler mornings and golden sunsets that painted the skyscraper-filled horizon visible from the penthouse. To everyone's surprise, especially Gregory's, an almost harmonious routine had been established in that house, once filled with silence and pain. Laura, now a full-year-old, was taking her first uncertain steps, always supported by Carmen's watchful hands. The girl was growing strong and curious, with a smile that lit up even the greyest of days. And there were many grey days when Gregory found himself watching from afar, as the nanny and his daughter played in the living room or in the small rooftop garden. There was a genuine connection between them, something that intrigued and, in a way, comforted him. "She looks at you as if you were her mother," he commented one Sunday afternoon, when he finally allowed himself to spend a few hours at home, away from the meetings and commitments he used as a shield against his grief. Carmen, who was helping Laura stack small colored blocks, felt a pang in her chest. "Children this age get attached easily, senor. It's natural." "Gregory," he corrected for the 3rd time that week, "I've already asked you to call me by my name." She nodded, her eyes downcast, avoiding the eye contact that always made her feel exposed, as if he could read her thoughts, discover the terrible plan from which she still couldn't extricate herself. Her birthday party was special, Gregory continued, sitting on the rug beside them, something he never would have done months ago. "You thought of every detail. Thank you for that." Carmen smiled, remembering the small celebration she had organized the week before. Nothing too elaborate, just a cake, a few balloons, simple gifts. But it was the first time since Patricia died that the house had witnessed something akin to genuine joy. "Laura deserved it," she replied simply. "Every child deserves to be celebrated." What she didn't say was how much that moment had meant to her as well, how for a few hours she could pretend it was real, that she was just a dedicated nanny, not a pawn in a cruel game of revenge and greed, that the threatening phone call she had received from Eduardo that morning, demanding progress on the plan, was just a distant nightmare. "You have a special family." "Gregory," she said suddenly, watching Laura, who was now crawling towards a colorful bull. "You should spend more time with her." He looked at her, surprised by her frankness. Carmen was usually reserved, almost overly respectful. This was the first time he had heard her make anything close to a criticism. "I think you're right," he admitted, running a hand through his dark hair, where a few premature gray strands were already visible. "It's hard being here, but it's getting easier. Thanks to you." The moment was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps. Soledad entered the room, her face pale, her eyes frightened. "Carmen, we need to talk now." Gregory noticed the immediate tension between the sisters. In 3 months, he still hadn't managed to connect with Soledad the same way he had with Carmen. The younger Gonzalez was a shadow in the house, efficient in her tasks but distant, always watching, rarely participating. "We're in the middle of playing," Carmen replied, trying to sound natural. "Can it wait a little?" "No, it can't," Soledad insisted, now in Spanish too fast for Gregory to understand. He called again. "He's losing his patience." Carmen paled. She stood up, quickly excusing herself. "Family problem in Venezuela. I'll be right back." As the sisters hurried out, Gregory was left there alone with Laura, feeling that something was not right. It wasn't the first time he had witnessed this kind of tense interaction between them. Always whispers, always worried looks, always this air of secrecy. In the small room they shared at the end of the hall, the Gonzalez sisters faced another crisis. "He said we have 1 week," Soledad whispered, her hands trembling as she closed the door. "1 week, Carmen, or he's going to send those photos to the federal police and say we were the ones who killed that man." Carmen sat on the edge of the bed, her head in her hands. Eduardo Marquez, who had introduced himself as Robert when he recruited them, was more dangerous than they had imagined. An experienced criminal who had entangled them in a web of lies, blackmail and threats since they arrived in the U.S., fleeing the Venezuelan crisis. First, it was small jobs, carrying suspicious packages, delivering envelopes to strange people. Then, before they knew it, they were witnessing a crime, a settling of scores that ended with a man dead. Eduardo made sure they would be the prime suspects if it ever came to light. He had photos, fingerprints, bought-off witnesses. And now the final plan: use them to destroy Gregory Manning, facilitating the takeover of the company by the treacherous partner. "Richard, I can't do this," Carmen murmured, looking at her sister with tear-filled eyes. "I can't hurt that child." "And what do you suggest? That we just tell him everything? We'll be deported or worse, arrested." Soledad paced the room like a caged animal. "She's just a rich kid from a rich man. She'll be fine." Carmen shot up, grabbing her sister's shoulders. "Do you really believe that? After everything we've seen here? That man lost the love of his life. He's trying to rebuild himself. And Laura, she's not to blame for any of this. And us, are we to blame for being born poor in a country that fell apart? For having to flee to avoid starving to death?" Soledad's voice trembled with anger and fear. "This is the game, Carmen. The rich always win. We're just trying to survive." A heavy silence fell between them. Carmen walked to the window, watching the sunset that stained the New York sky. She thought of Laura, of her innocent smiles, of how completely she trusted her. She thought of Gregory, a broken man trying to pick up the pieces for the love of his daughter. "I think there's a way out," she said finally, turning to her sister. "But it's risky. And we'll need to trust someone who might hate us when they learn the truth." Richard Alvarez stared at his computer screen with growing impatience. The numbers didn't lie. Manning Textiles was recovering quickly from the previous year's losses. The expansion into the south, the Japanese investment, the new export contracts, everything indicated that the company would not only survive Gregory's personal crisis, but emerge stronger. "Damn him," he muttered to himself, slamming the laptop shut. 15 years dedicated to that company. First as a trusted employee of old Anthony Manning, then as a junior partner when the patriarch decided to pass the torch. But not to him, who had sacrificed his youth, relationships, everything for Manning Textiles. No, the old man chose his spoiled son, fresh out of college, full of theories and little practice. His cell phone vibrated on the desk. It was Eduardo. "Tell me you have good news," he answered without preamble. "Depends on what you consider good." The voice on the other end sounded tense. "The girls are hesitating. The older one has gotten attached to the kid." Richard swore under his breath. "You said they were reliable, that they'd do anything to avoid deportation." "And they will," Eduardo assured him. "They just need a bigger incentive. More money. I'm already risking everything on this plan. If Gregory finds out—" "He won't find out," Eduardo cut in. "When we're done, he'll be so broken he'll beg you to take over the company. A businessman who loses his wife and then his daughter. Who would trust someone so unlucky to lead an empire? Richard ran a hand over his face, thoughtful. The plan had seemed perfect when they conceived it. Use the vulnerable immigrants to get close to Gregory, gain his trust, and then fake a fatal accident with the girl. The blame would fall on the negligent nannies, who would disappear shortly after, leaving a devastated father and a company adrift. "How much do they want?" he finally asked. "Another 100,000 each. That's absurd. We already agreed on 50. Inflation, my friend," Eduardo laughed humorlessly. "The cost of a life has gone up." Richard's stomach churned. He wasn't a murderer. He had never actually wanted to hurt the girl, just remove her from the equation. Send her far away, perhaps for adoption in another state. But Eduardo had made it clear that fake accidents tended to become real when investigated too closely. "Fine," he finally conceded. "But I want guarantees that it will happen this time." "I'm tired of waiting." "Saturday," Eduardo replied, "in Central Park during the weekly outing. Crowds confusion. The kid disappears. Simple as that." After hanging up, Richard stared into the emptiness of his luxurious office. Somewhere, buried under layers of ambition and resentment, his conscience tried to emerge. Images of Laura, his goddaughter whom he had held in the hospital right after her birth, for whom he had bought the first teddy bear, tried to penetrate the armor he had built. But it was too late to turn back. The plan was in motion, and he couldn't stop now. Not when he was so close to having what he had always deserved. The rain was falling heavily that Wednesday when Mrs. Celia found the envelope. She was doing her weekly cleaning of the Gonzalez sisters' room, something she insisted on doing personally despite Carmen's protests. "A clean house reflects a clean soul," the housekeeper used to say, with the simple wisdom of someone who has lived long enough to know the dark corners of human nature. The envelope was hidden inside a children's book, one of those Carmen read to Laura before bed. It wasn't in Mrs. Celia's nature to snoop, but something, perhaps instinct, perhaps experience, made her open it. The content sent a chill down her spine, photos of the Gonzalez sisters with an unknown man in front of an abandoned warehouse. More photos, the two of them carrying what looked like a body wrapped in a tarp. And the worst part, a letter in Spanish, detailing a plan to get rid of the Manning girl the following Saturday in Central Park. The housekeeper sat on the edge of the bed, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. For a moment, she wanted to believe she had misunderstood, that her rusty Spanish was betraying her. But the images didn't lie, nor did the dates and times detailed in the document. "Dear Lord," she whispered, making the sign of the cross. "What do I do now?" The answer came immediately. Tell Gregory, of course. Call the police. Stop this madness before it was too late. But then she remembered the look on Carmen's face as she rocked Laura to sleep the night before. The genuine care she showed, the infinite patience, the affection that seemed impossible to fake. Something was wrong with this story. She put the envelope in her apron pocket and went downstairs, determined to confront Carmen as soon as she returned from her morning walk with Laura. She needed to hear the truth from her lips before making any decision. At the playground near the condo, Carmen pushed Laura on the toddler swing, watching the little girl's wide smile each time she went a little higher. Around them, other nannies chatted in small groups, trading stories about their employers, complaining about salaries, sharing tips on how to soothe colicky babies or nightmares. Carmen kept her distance from these groups. She was afraid to make friends, to get involved, to have to lie even more. Her life was already a sufficiently complex web of lies. "Higher," Laura requested in her still limited but increasingly clear language. "Just a little more, mi cielo," Carmen replied, laughing at the little one's excitement. "If you go any higher, you'll fly to the clouds, can fly," the girl repeated, clapping her hands. It was then that Carmen noticed the woman. Tall, elegant, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She was watching her intently from the other side of the square, making no effort to hide her interest. When their eyes met, the woman started walking towards her. Carmen's heart sped up. Was it someone sent by Eduardo to watch her? Or worse, to ensure the plan would be carried out on Saturday? "Hello," the stranger said as she approached. "You must be Carmen, the nanny for little Laura Manning." Carmen instinctively pulled the swing closer, placing herself between the woman and the child. "Yes, that's me. And who are you?" The woman smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "My name is Beatrice Andrade. I'm an attorney, and I think we have a lot to talk about regarding your employer. I don't understand, Carmen said, her stomach sinking. If Mr. Manning needs to speak with me, he knows where to find me. It's not Gregory Manning I want to talk about, Beatrice replied, lowering her voice. It's Richard Alvarez, and a man named Eduardo Marquez, or Robert, as he prefers to be called by his employees. The world seemed to freeze around Carmen. How did this woman know? I don't know what you're talking about, she murmured, picking Laura up and preparing to get out of there as quickly as possible. I know about the photos, Beatrice continued, subtly blocking her path. About the blackmail, about the plan for Saturday. Carmen felt her legs weaken. Who are you, really? Someone who can help if you're willing to do the right thing, the woman replied, handing her a card. Call me today alone. I have a proposal that could save you your sister, and most importantly, this innocent child. Before Carmen could respond, Beatrice walked away with the same elegance she had arrived with, quickly blending in with the pedestrians on the busy sidewalk. With Laura safe in her arms, Carmen looked at the card in her trembling hand. Beatrice Andrade, private investigator, and a phone number. On the back, handwritten, was a message that made her blood run cold. I know you want to do the right thing. It's not too late. Gregory knew something was wrong the moment he walked into his home that evening. The silence was different, not the peaceful silence of an orderly house, but the tense silence that precedes a storm. Mrs. Celia was waiting for him in the living room, her restless hands smoothing and re-smoothing the same spot on her apron. In 15 years of working together, he had never seen her so agitated. What happened? He asked, dropping his briefcase on the sofa. Is it Laura? The girl is fine, the housekeeper hurried to answer. She's sleeping. Carmen just put her to bed. Then, Mrs. Celia hesitated, looking at her own hands for a moment before facing him. I need to show you something, sir. Something I found today in the Gonzalez sisters' room. She held out the envelope, now slightly crumpled from being held all day. Gregory took it with a confused expression. Celia, you know we don't go through employees' belongings. If there was something private— Open it, she interrupted with unusual firmness. Please, Mr. Gregory, open it. The tone of her voice, urgent, almost desperate, made him obey without further question. As he examined the contents, his face lost its color. When he finished reading the letter, his eyes were as hard as stone. Where are they now? He asked with a forced calm that barely concealed his rising fury. Carmen is in Laura's room. Soledad left an hour ago, said she was going to buy some headache medicine. Gregory was already on his way to the stairs when Mrs. Celia stopped him by the arm. Wait, sir, there's more. He turned, impatient. What more could there be? He already had enough proof that the women he had entrusted his daughter's life to were planning to kill her, or kidnap her, or who knows what. Carmen came to me this afternoon, the housekeeper continued. Before I showed you this, she told me everything. Told you what exactly? Faison, about the blackmail, about how she and her sister were coerced into this plan, about how Richard is behind it all. The mention of his partner and childhood friend's name hit Gregory like a punch to the gut. Richard, what does he have to do with this? Everything, according to Carmen. He was the one who hired some guy named Eduardo to recruit the girls. The idea was to use two vulnerable immigrants with complicated pasts to get close to you and at the right moment harm Laura. Gregory sat down heavily on the sofa, his mind trying to process the enormity of the betrayal. Richard, his best friend, Laura's godfather. The man who held his hand in the hospital when Patricia died. Why? He murmured, more to himself than to Mrs. Celia. Power, money, the usual, the housekeeper replied with the wisdom of someone who has seen many betrayals in her life. Carmen said Richard always felt entitled to the company, that your father should have left control to him, not to you. Gregory closed his eyes, remembering old conversations. Glances he hadn't understood at the time, subtle comments that seemed harmless in the moment. How could he have been so blind? And why is Carmen telling you this now? Wasn't the plan for Saturday? Because she got attached to the girl. To our Laura, Mrs. Celia replied, sitting beside him. And because, well, I think she got attached to you too, sir. She said she couldn't live with herself knowing she destroyed a family that has already suffered so much. Something stirred inside Gregory, an emotion he couldn't name, mixed with the anger and fear that dominated his thoughts. I can't just believe her, Celia. These photos, the letter. I know. That's why she suggested a plan, a way to catch Richard and this Eduardo character red-handed, proving everything. Gregory looked up, meeting the sincere eyes of the housekeeper, who had been almost a mother to him since his teens. What plan? Carmen watched Laura sleep, her little chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm, her dark curls spread across the pillow. How many nights had she spent like this, watching over the sleep of this child who unintentionally had opened a crack in her shielded heart? "Forgive me, mi angel," she whispered, lightly stroking the girl's cheek, "for almost being a monster in your life." The sound of the door opening made her turn quickly. Gregory stood there, his face an unreadable mask, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her instinctively retreat. "Mrs. Celia told me everything," he said, his voice low so as not to wake Laura. "She showed me the envelope." "Too?" Carmen nodded, resigned. She had been expecting this since she confessed to the housekeeper hours ago. Part of her even felt relieved. The weight of the secret had become unbearable. "I understand if you want to call the police," she said, maintaining her dignity despite her fear. "I just ask that you let me explain everything first. Not to justify myself, but so you have all the information." Gregory approached the crib, watching his daughter for a moment before facing the nanny again. "Why should I believe you now? How do I know this isn't just another manipulation?" It was a fair question. Carmen took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "I can't prove my intentions now. I can only prove them with actions. That's why I offered to help stop Richard and Eduardo, even knowing I might end up arrested or deported afterwards." She held out her hand, showing the card she had received earlier. "This woman approached me in the park today. She knows about the plan, about everything. She said she can help, but I need to call her. I think she's investigating Richard for other reasons." Gregory took the card, examining it with suspicion. Beatrice Andrade. Never heard of her. Neither had I until today, but she knew details that only someone very close to the case would know. A tense silence settled between them, broken only by Laura's soft breathing. "Mrs. Celia mentioned a plan," Gregory said finally. "Something to catch Richard in the act." Carmen nodded, grateful that he was at least considering the possibility. "Yes, if we go ahead with the original plan, the outing to Central Park on Saturday, but with the police ready, we could capture Eduardo in the act, and with him get to Richard." "Using my daughter as bait," Gregory completed, his voice laced with skepticism. "Do you really think I would allow that?" "Not as real bait," Carmen hurried to say. "We could use a doll in the stroller, covered with blankets. From a distance it would look like Laura. Eduardo wouldn't get close enough to notice the difference until it was too late." "And where would my daughter be during this charade?" "Safe with you, or with someone you completely trust." Gregory began to pace the room, thoughtful. The idea was risky, but it could work. If Richard was really plotting against him, using these women to get to Laura, he needed concrete proof. Words and accusations wouldn't be enough against a man with Richard Alvarez's influence and resources. "And your sister?" he asked suddenly. "Is she in on this plan too?" Carmen hesitated. "Soledad." She's scared. "Eduardo has her under his control more than me. He's hurt her a few times. Physically, I mean." Gregory's expression softened slightly. Behind the anger and suspicion, there was still the man who had been moved by the story of two immigrants fleeing a collapsing country. "You understand I can't just trust you now, don't you?" "That I need more than words?" "I understand," she replied, holding his gaze. "That's why I suggest we call this investigator. Together. Now. If she's willing to help us, maybe we have a chance to make this work." Gregory looked again at his sleeping daughter, so small, so vulnerable. Then at the woman who for 3 months had cared for her with an affection that seemed too genuine to be fake. "All right," he decided finally. "We'll call her. But if I feel for even a second that this is another trap—" "It's not," Carmen interrupted softly. "I'm choosing a side, Gregory. Her side." She pointed to Laura. "And yours." As they left the nursery, leaving little Laura protected in her innocent sleep, neither of them noticed the shadow moving in the dark hallway. Soledad, who had returned unnoticed, had heard enough to know that her sister had betrayed the plan, and with it, perhaps the only chance they had to escape Eduardo's clutches. With her eyes filled with tears of fear or anger, she herself couldn't tell. She pulled her phone from her pocket and typed a quick message. She told them everything. They're planning a trap for Saturday. Across the city in his luxurious apartment, Richard Alvarez received the message with a cold smile. Beside him, Eduardo Marquez was already preparing an alternative to the original plan. "If they want to play," Richard murmured, pouring himself a generous glass of whiskey, "we'll play. But by my rules." Meanwhile, in a discreet hotel downtown, Beatriz Andrade organized documents and recordings accumulated over months of investigation. Among them, one in particular stood out, a copy of an old Manning Textiles contract, signed by Gregory's late father, with a specific clause about the company's succession that had never been revealed to the son. Finally, she muttered to herself as the phone rang, displaying an unknown number. The missing piece of the puzzle. Chapter 3. The rescue night was falling over New York City as three people gathered around the dining table in the Manning penthouse. Gregory, tense and alert, watched the interaction between Carmen and the woman who had introduced herself as Beatriz Andrade. Mrs. Celia stood by the door, a silent sentinel. Upstairs, Laura slept, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. "I've been investigating Richard Alvarez for almost a year," Beatrice explained, opening a folder on the table. "Not just because of this case, but for a series of corporate frauds he's been committing." "Why?" Gregory asked, still suspicious. "Who's paying for this investigation?" Beatrice smiled, understanding his caution. "Originally, I was hired by the widow of Maurice Porter. Do you remember him?" The name hit Gregory like a lightning bolt. Maurice had been the head accountant for Manning Textiles for over 2 decades, working directly with his father. He had died tragically, an apparent suicide, weeks before old Anthony Manning passed away. "Maurice didn't kill himself," Beatrice continued, correctly interpreting Gregory's expression. "He discovered that Richard had been embezzling money from the company for years, using phantom accounts overseas. Accounts that are still active, by the way." The investigator pulled more documents from the folder, bank statements, wire transfers, documents with signatures Gregory recognized immediately. How did you get these?" "Unconventional methods, let's say," she replied enigmatically. "The important thing is that they are real evidence. And there's more." She slid a yellow document across the table. It was a copy of Anthony Manning's will, with a clause underlined in red. "In the event of the premature death of my son, Gregory Manning, or permanent disability preventing him from managing the company, all his shares will be transferred to his direct descendant, under the guardianship of Richard Alvarez, until the heir's legal majority." Gregory read aloud, his stomach churning with every word. "That means that if something happens to you, Richard takes full control of the company, until Laura turns 18, Beatrice completed. "And let's face it, accidents happen frequently during that time." Carmen felt a chill run down her spine. The cruelty of the plan was even deeper than she had imagined. It wasn't just about getting the girl out of the picture. It was about creating a direct path for Richard to take over the company for nearly 2 decades. But if Laura disappeared, Gregory asked, his voice nearly breaking as he uttered the words, the clause wouldn't be activated. "Exactly," Beatrice confirmed. "That's why the plan changed. Initially, Eduardo Marquez was hired to just remove Laura from the equation. A fake accident, an unexplained disappearance. Something that would destroy you emotionally, drive you to the brink of collapse, maybe even to suicide. And when that didn't happen," Carmen continued, now understanding the extent of the manipulation, "they adapted the plan. It wouldn't just be Laura anymore. It would be you too." 2 separate accidents, seemingly unrelated, Beatrice nodded. First the daughter, then the devastated father who can't move on. Perfectly understandable to anyone. A heavy silence fell over the room as Gregory digested the information. The betrayal by Richard, his childhood friend, seemed incomprehensible. And yet, looking back at small signs ignored over the years, it all began to make a terrible kind of sense. "How did you find out about Carmen and Soledad?" he finally asked, turning to Beatrice. "I intercepted communications between Eduardo and Richard. When I realized they were recruiting 2 immigrants for the dirty work, I started monitoring their activities as well. It was risky to approach Carmen directly, but something told me she wasn't fully committed to the plan." Carmen looked down, ashamed. I should have done something sooner. I should have told you everything as soon as I realized what was happening. Fear is a powerful weapon, Beatrice replied with surprising gentleness. Eduardo Marquez is an expert at using it. You're not the first to fall into his trap. Gregory stood up abruptly, walking to the window. The city glittered outside, millions of lights dotting the darkness as if nothing were wrong in the world. As if his life wasn't falling apart for the second time in less than 2 years. What do you suggest we do? He asked without turning around. We can't just go to the police now, Beatrice answered. Richard has contacts there. We need to catch them in the act with irrefutable proof. The park plan, Carmen murmured. It could work, but we need to modify it. Beatrice nodded, approaching the table to sketch a quick diagram on a piece of paper. The key is for Eduardo to believe everything is proceeding as planned. For that, Soledad needs to keep pretending she's on their side. Soledad. Carmen felt a tightness in her chest. I don't know if we can trust her. She's scared, vulnerable. Eduardo has her under his control in a way that... Her words were cut off by the sound of hurried footsteps. Mrs. Celia, who had remained silent until then, opened the door and peeked into the hallway. It's Soledad, she announced in a low voice. She just arrived. And she's not alone. Carmen's heart raced. Who's with her? Before the housekeeper could answer, Soledad entered the dining room. Her face was pale, her eyes red from hours of crying. And right behind her, Eduardo Marquez, tall, elegant in his expensive suit, with a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. Good evening, everyone, he said with false cordiality. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Carmen jumped to her feet, terror etched on her face. Gregory immediately positioned himself between Eduardo and the hallway leading to Laura's room. Who are you and what are you doing in my house? He asked with forced calm. Robert Almeida, the man replied, extending a hand that no one took. I'm the, let's say, person responsible for the Gonzalez ladies in the U.S. I came to check if everything is all right with them. Beatrice remained seated, slowly sliding the documents back into her folder without taking her eyes off Eduardo. He noticed her frowning slightly. And you are? A friend of the family, Gregory answered before Beatrice could say anything. And we were having a private conversation. Eduardo smiled again, his eyes studying every detail of the room, every person, every expression. Of course. I don't mean to intrude. I just wanted to confirm the details for the Saturday outing. Soledad mentioned something about Central Park. The accusing look Carmen shot her sister was met with silent tears. Soledad seemed like a puppet, the invisible strings clearly in the hands of the man beside her. Yes, I was thinking of taking Laura to see the swans, Carmen replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She's never been there. Wonderful, Eduardo exclaimed with exaggerated enthusiasm. Children love that park. Perhaps I'll stop by myself for a moment of leisure. The veiled threat hung in the air like an invisible poison. Gregory took a step forward, his patience wearing thin. I appreciate your visit, Mr. Almeida, but it's late and we have matters to resolve. Eduardo nodded, unfazed by the blatant hostility. Certainly. I just need a moment alone with Carmen to discuss some administrative details about her work visa. No. Gregory's response was immediate and sharp. Any conversation you need to have with my employees can be done during normal business hours and in my presence. Something darkened in Eduardo's eyes, a flash of anger quickly controlled. As you wish. In that case, I'll return tomorrow, during business hours. He turned to leave but stopped beside Soledad, whispering something in her ear that made the young woman turn even paler. Until tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen, he said with a small theatrical bow, it was a pleasure to meet you. When the door finally closed behind him, Carmen collapsed into a chair, trembling visibly. Soledad remained standing like a statue until Mrs. Celia gently guided her to sit down as well. He knows, Carmen murmured, looking at Beatrice. I figured out who you are. Probably, the investigator agreed, surprisingly calm, which means we need to act faster than we planned. He'll report to Richard immediately. Gregory picked up the phone. I'm calling the police right now. No! Carmen and Beatrice exclaimed in unison. Richard has police contacts, remember? Beatrice continued. If you file a formal report now without concrete evidence, it will go nowhere. And it will put everyone in danger. So what do you suggest? That I just wait until they try something against my daughter? Soledad, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, her voice choked with emotion. Eduardo changed the plan. It's not going to be on Saturday anymore. Everyone turned to her. Carmen approached her sister, taking her hands. What do you know, Sol? What did he tell you? It's going to be tomorrow, Soledad replied, tears now streaming freely. In the afternoon, when you usually take Laura to the playground. He has men positioned. They're going to make it look like a common kidnapping, the kind that happens every day in the city. Gregory felt his blood run cold. And why are you telling us this now? Why should we believe you after everything? Soledad looked up, meeting Gregory's gaze for the first time. Because he said that if I didn't help, he would kill Carmen too. And I may have done a lot of wrong things in my life, Mr. Manning, but I couldn't live knowing I caused the death of my only sister. Carmen hugged Soledad tightly, both now crying openly. Gregory exchanged glances with Beatrice, who seemed to be rapidly assessing all available options. We have to get Laura out of here tonight, the investigator said finally. Take her to a safe place that neither Richard nor Eduardo knows about. Where? Gregory asked, his mind racing to find a solution. All the obvious places, the country house, the beach apartment, Richard knows them all. Mrs. Celia, who had been watching in silence, stepped forward. My sister has a small inn in a coastal town in Connecticut. Simple place, but clean and isolated. No one would think to look for Gregory Manning's daughter there. Beatrice agreed. That could work. But you can't go, Gregory. They'll be watching your movements. We need you to maintain your normal routine. Go to the office tomorrow as if nothing has happened. Are you crazy? I'm not leaving my daughter. It's the only way to protect her, Beatrice insisted. If you disappear with her, they'll know the plan has been discovered. We need to keep up the charade for one more day, just one day, to gather the evidence and catch them red-handed. Gregory ran his hands through his hair, desperation clear in every gesture. And who would take Laura? Who can I trust with her life? A heavy silence filled the room. Then, to everyone's surprise, Soledad spoke up. Carmen. Carmen should go with her. No one takes better care of Laura than my sister. Gregory looked at Carmen. The woman he had just hours ago discovered was involved in a plot to harm his daughter. The same woman who had risked everything to tell the truth, to try to protect Laura. Would you go? He asked, his voice filled with a contradictory mix of emotions. Suspicion, hope, fear. Carmen nodded, her eyes still teary. I will protect Laura with my own life if I have to. You have my word. Words don't mean much right now, he replied harshly. Then don't trust words, Beatrice intervened. Trust actions. Carmen could have gone along with the plan. She could have betrayed you in 1,000 ways. Instead, she's here putting herself in danger. Gregory looked at each face in the room, weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, his eyes rested on Carmen again. If anything happens to my daughter... It won't, she assured him, holding his gaze. I promise, Gregory. I'll protect her as if she were my own. The early morning hours were advancing when Mrs. Celia's car left the building's garage, carrying Carmen and a sleeping Laura in the back seat. Beatrice followed in another vehicle, a few yards behind, ensuring they weren't being tailed. In the apartment, Gregory remained awake, staring at the city from his office window. An untouched glass of whiskey on the desk beside him. Soledad had been taken to a discreet hotel downtown, protected by a trusted security guard of Beatrice's. The house was strangely empty and silent. The phone rang, cutting through the silence like a razor. It was Richard. Heard you had an unexpected visitor tonight, he said without preamble. Robert can be a bit impulsive sometimes. I hope he didn't cause any trouble. Gregory took a deep breath, forcing himself to sound natural. Nothing I couldn't handle. But I confess I was surprised by the visit. He's just worried about the girls. You know how these immigrants are, always needing extra supervision. The casualness with which Richard spoke about the women he planned to use as scapegoats made Gregory's stomach turn with disgust. How had he never seen the cruelty behind the friendly facade? Of course, he replied, keeping his voice neutral. Any other reason for calling so late? A brief hesitation on the other end. Just wanted to confirm our meeting tomorrow with the Chinese investors. It's an important contract, we can't lose it. I'll be there, Gregory assured him. As always. Excellent. Oh, and Gregory, give little Laura a kiss for me. It's been a while since I've seen her. The phone disconnected before Gregory could reply. The mention of his daughter's name from those lips sounded like a profanity. He gripped the glass so tightly he almost broke it. His cell phone vibrated with a message from Beatrice. They arrived safely. No one followed them. A wave of relief washed over him, immediately replaced by a new wave of tension. Laura was safe for now, but the game wasn't over, and the next move would be crucial. In a simple seaside inn surrounded by mountains and forest, Carmen rocked Laura back to sleep after the long drive. The little girl had woken up frightened in the unfamiliar surroundings, but Carmen's soft voice singing the same Venezuelan lullaby as always quickly calmed her down. The room was simple: a double bed, a makeshift crib, walls of a white faded by time and sea air, so different from the luxurious apartment in New York, and yet somehow more comforting in this moment of crisis. "Rest, mi cielo," Carmen whispered, watching Laura finally drift off. "Tomorrow will be a better day, I promise." A light knock on the door announced the arrival of Eleanor, Mrs. Celia's sister, a kind-faced woman with perceptive eyes, carrying a tray with tea and cookies. "Is the little one asleep?" she asked in a low voice, placing the tray on the small table near the window. Carmen nodded, moving away from the crib so as not to disturb Laura's sleep. "Thank you for taking us in like this so suddenly." "Celia explained it's a family emergency," the woman replied, not asking any further questions. "The tea will help you relax. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, child." Carmen smiled sadly, accepting the steaming cup. "Something like that." When Eleanor left, Carmen sat by the window, watching the moon reflected on the calm bay. She thought of Gregory, alone in that empty apartment, probably consumed with worry. She thought of Soledad, of how they had reached this point. Two young Venezuelan women who just wanted a better life, now entangled in a plot of greed and revenge. Her cell phone vibrated with a message. It was Beatrice. "Plan in motion. Richard confirmed meeting with Gregory tomorrow. Stay alert and do not communicate with anyone but me." Carmen replied with a simple "okay," turned off the phone and hid it inside her bag. Then she approached the makeshift crib where Laura slept, her little fists clenched beside her face, her breathing soft and regular. "I'm going to fix this," she promised softly, lightly stroking the girl's hair. "For you, for your father, and even for myself." Outside, the waves broke gently on the beach, a constant, reassuring rhythm. Carmen finally allowed herself a few hours of rest, knowing that the next day would demand all her strength and courage. The morning in New York dawned grey, with a fine drizzle that wrapped the buildings in a melancholic mist. Gregory Manning left his apartment at his usual time, wearing one of his impeccable suits, Italian leather briefcase in hand, his expression as serious as ever. To any casual observer, and he knew he was being observed, it looked like just another day in the life of the businessman. Inside the car with his usual driver, he allowed himself a quick check of his phone. No new messages from Carmen or Beatrice. That was good. It meant everything was still going according to plan. Upon arriving at the imposing headquarters of Manning Textiles, he greeted the security guards and receptionists with his usual cordiality. In the elevator, alone for a few seconds, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath, preparing for the moment he would face Richard face to face. His secretary greeted him with a smile. "Good morning, Mr. Manning. Mr. Alvarez is already in the conference room with the Chinese investors. They asked to be notified as soon as you arrived." "Thank you, Monica. Please bring coffee for everyone." Gregory adjusted his tie, lifted his chin, and walked into the conference room with the confident posture everyone expected of him. 5 formally dressed Asian men stood to greet him, and there was Richard, smiling broadly, as if he weren't planning the destruction of his supposed best friend. "Gregory, we were just talking about you," he exclaimed, approaching for a hug that Gregory accepted stiffly. "I was telling our friends about the expansion project in the South." The next 2 hours were an exercise in self-control for Gregory, leading the meeting, discussing financial projections, answering technical questions, all while watching Richard's every move, every furtive glance at his watch, every text message sent discreetly under the table. At 11:30 a.m., Richard excused himself to take an urgent call. When he returned minutes later, his face showed a poorly concealed agitation. "Everything all right?" Gregory asked, interrupting his presentation with feigned concern. Yes. Just a problem with a supplier," Richard replied quickly. Please continue. At 12:45 p.m., the meeting concluded successfully. The Chinese investors seemed pleased, promising a final answer next week. As they said their goodbyes, Gregory's cell phone vibrated in his pocket. A message from Beatrice. They're moving. Men positioned at the playground. Await instructions. Lunch to celebrate? Richard proposed, placing a familiar hand on Gregory's shoulder. That Japanese place you like. Unfortunately, I can't, Gregory replied, forcing a smile. I promised Carmen I'd stop by home to have lunch with Laura. You know how she gets when I break promises. A strange glint passed through Richard's eyes. Of course. Family first, always. Maybe another day. They parted ways in the building's lobby. Gregory got into his car and instructed the driver to take him home, aware that he was likely being followed. Meanwhile, at the playground near Gregory's condo, two men waited patiently, watching every nanny who arrived with her young charges. The absence of Carmen and Laura was starting to cause unease. One of them checked his watch again, 1:15 p.m. Well past the usual time, the Venezuelan woman brought the girl. At that same moment, in a nearby coffee shop, Soledad Gonzalez sat nervously, stirring a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. Across the street in the makeshift surveillance van, Beatrice monitored every move. Soledad's phone rang exactly as predicted. Where's your sister? Eduardo's voice sounded irritated on the other end of the line. I don't know, Soledad replied, her voice trembling, following the agreed-upon script. She didn't come home last night after you left. I thought maybe you knew something. A tense silence. And the kid? She's not home either. I think Carmen took her. A string of Spanish curses followed by quick instructions. Stay where you are. I'm sending someone to get you. And Soledad, if you're lying to me. The threat hung in the air. The call ended. Soledad put the phone away with trembling hands and glanced briefly at the van across the street, a prearranged signal. Then she stood up and walked slowly towards the exit, as instructed. Less than 3 minutes later, a black car pulled up in front of the coffee shop. Two men got out and practically dragged Soledad inside. Beatrice's van began to follow them from a distance. The plan was in motion. The bait had been cast. In the apartment, Gregory waited anxiously for news. He had arrived 10 minutes earlier, maintaining the charade of a father returning for lunch with his daughter. Mrs. Celia, following the plan, set the table as if she were really expecting Carmen and Laura at any moment. Gregory's phone rang. It was Richard. Gregory, something terrible has happened. His partner's voice sounded worried. An almost perfect performance. I just got a call from Robert. Carmen has disappeared with Laura. Gregory felt his heart race despite knowing it was part of the plan. What do you mean disappeared? Nobody knows. They didn't go to the park today, they're not at home. Robert is trying to locate her sister, Soledad, to get some information. My God! Gregory forced his voice to sound desperate, which wasn't difficult given the real stress of the situation. I'm calling the police immediately. No. The reply came too quickly. I mean, maybe we should wait a bit. It could just be a misunderstanding. Maybe Carmen took the girl to a doctor, or on a different outing. Without telling me? Without telling anyone. Gregory raised his voice, allowing the real anger he felt for Richard to overflow. We're talking about my daughter, Richard. I know. I'm on my way over now. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Don't do anything until I get there, please. The call ended. Gregory exchanged a look with Mrs. Celia, who had heard the entire conversation. He's coming, he said simply. Then the plan is working, the housekeeper replied. Her usually kind face now hardened with determination. May God protect our girl. The phone rang again. Beatrice, this time. We're following Soledad. As expected, Eduardo picked her up. They're heading to a warehouse in Queens near the airport. Richard is coming here, Gregory informed her. Perfect. Keep him there. Get him to call Eduardo in front of you. We need a confession, even a partial one. Gregory hung up, his mind racing. How could he make Richard give himself away? How could the man he considered a brother for so many years admit his cruel plan to his face? The answer came in a flash. He quickly called Carmen. I need you to record an audio message, he said as soon as she answered. And send it to my phone in the next 10 minutes. In the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Queens, Soledad sat on a metal chair facing Eduardo Marquez. Two burly men stood guard near the only door. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Eduardo said, his voice dangerously calm. "Where is your sister with the child?" "I already told you I don't know," Soledad repeated, the fear in her voice entirely genuine. "Carmen didn't tell me anything." Eduardo moved closer, grabbing her chin forcefully. "Don't lie to me, sweetheart. You sleep in the same room, eat at the same table. Carmen wouldn't disappear without telling you something." "But she did," Soledad insisted. "After you left yesterday, we had a fight. I said horrible things. I accused her of betraying us, of ruining everything. She got furious, said she couldn't take it anymore, that she'd rather risk it all than continue with this." Eduardo studied her face, searching for signs of a lie. Soledad held his gaze, the tears streaming down her face genuinely, not for the reason he imagined, but from the real fear she felt, from the weight of the situation. Eduardo's phone rang, interrupting the interrogation. It was Richard. "Tell me you have good news," he answered, taking a few steps away from Soledad. "I'm at Gregory's house now," Richard replied, his voice tense. "He's on the verge of a breakdown. He thinks Carmen kidnapped his daughter." "She did kidnap her," Eduardo confirmed. "Only that wasn't the plan, damn it. She was supposed to fake an accident, not a kidnapping." "Lower your voice," Richard hissed. "Gregory might hear, and this complicates everything. The police will inevitably get involved. Then speed things up. Get him to sign that power of attorney we prepared, temporarily transferring power to you while he deals with the family crisis. Once you have legal control of the company, so the rest is easy. It's not that simple. He's irrational, talking about calling the FBI, Interpol, everyone." Eduardo swore under his breath. "Where's the other one, the old housekeeper?" "Mrs. Celia?" "Right here beside him like a guard dog. Get rid of her. I need Gregory alone, vulnerable, and preferably very drunk." "I'll do my best," Richard replied. "And what about Carmen and the girl?" "Leave it to me. I have men searching all the airports, bus stations. If they try to leave the country, we'll know. And if they've already left?" Eduardo glanced at Soledad, who was watching the conversation with wide eyes. "Then we'll have to use our plan B." The call ended. Eduardo returned to Soledad, a cruel smile on his lips. "Do you know what plan B is, sweetheart?" he asked softly, caressing her face in a way that made her shudder. "It's when you take the fall for everything. Kidnapping, murder, the whole package. You go to prison forever, while your sister disappears with the kid. Everyone loses. Except me, of course." The fear in Soledad's eyes was real, but she knew that outside, Beatrice and her team were waiting for the right moment to act. And somewhere on the coast, Carmen was protecting Laura, the innocent girl who had won her heart against all odds. In the Manning apartment, Gregory faced his own demon. Richard paced the living room, seemingly agitated, occasionally glancing at his phone as if expecting news. "I don't understand," Gregory repeated, his voice choked with genuine emotion. "Why would Carmen do this? She seemed to love Laura so much. She cared for her like she was her own daughter." "Sometimes people aren't who we think they are," Richard replied with a note of irony that only Gregory could perceive. Robert had certain suspicions about the Gonzalez sisters, a problematic history in Venezuela, possible involvement with criminal elements. "And you didn't think it was important to tell me that before bringing them in to care for my daughter?" Gregory exploded, the genuine anger lending credibility to his performance. Richard looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Robert assured me they were just rumors, nothing confirmed, and they had excellent references." "References that he provided himself, I imagine," Gregory retorted acidly. At that moment, his phone rang. "An unknown number," Gregory answered, putting it on speakerphone as planned. "Mr. Manning?" Carmen's voice sounded shaky, exactly as they had rehearsed. "Please don't hang up." "Carmen!" Gregory exclaimed, the shock in his voice sounding authentic. "Where is my daughter? What have you done with her?" "She's fine, she's safe," Carmen replied. "But I can't tell you where we are." "It's not safe." Richard moved closer, his eyes fixed on the phone, trying to appear as surprised and outraged as Gregory. "What are you talking about? Why did you take my daughter?" "To protect her." Carmen's voice broke slightly. "They were going to hurt her, Mr. Manning. Richard and that man Eduardo. I heard them planning everything. An accident, they said. Something that would look natural, but that She paused, sobbing. I couldn't let that happen. Not to Laura. Gregory's eyes locked on Richard, whose face had lost all color. The trap was set. Carmen, this is crazy, Richard intervened, moving closer to the phone. Who put these ideas in your head? I would never harm my goddaughter. Gregory is like a brother to me. Then explain the meetings with Eduardo Marquez, Carmen challenged. Explain why he was threatening us with deportation and prison if we didn't follow the plan. Explain why you're trying to take over the company. This is absurd, Richard exclaimed, but his voice trembled slightly. Gregory, you can't believe this. This woman is clearly disturbed. She probably planned this kidnapping from the beginning. I have proof, Carmen continued. Recordings. Eduardo wasn't as careful as he thought. And I have your father's original will, Mr. Manning. The one Richard altered to include the guardianship clause. Richard's face transformed. The mask of concern fell away, replaced by a hard, cold expression Gregory had never seen before. Where did you get that? Richard asked, momentarily forgetting the charade he was maintaining. Does it matter? Carmen replied. What matters is that I know the truth, and so do others. Gregory took a step toward Richard, who instinctively backed away. Is it true, he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Did you plan to harm my daughter? Your goddaughter? Richard looked around like a cornered animal. Then his face changed again, taking on an expression of disdain. You never deserved that company, he said finally, his voice laced with bitterness. Your father promised it to me. Years of loyalty, of hard work, and then you show up, fresh out of college, full of modern ideas and charming smiles, and he hands you everything. Everything! So that's it? Gregory asked, genuinely shocked by the intensity of the hatred in the voice of the man he considered a brother. Here's a friendship, of partnership. I trusted you with my life, Richard. With my daughter's life. The girl was never in any real danger, Richard replied, trying to backtrack now that he realized how far he had gone. It was just a scare, something to destabilize you, to make you realize you needed help managing the company. Killing my daughter was just a scare. Gregory's voice rose dangerously. It wasn't about killing her. Richard protested, panic finally breaking his composure. Eduardo went too far. He wasn't supposed to. That wasn't what... The sound of the door opening interrupted his confession. Beatrice entered, accompanied by 2 police officers. Behind them Soledad, her face tear-stained but her eyes determined. Richard Alvarez. One of the officers called out, You're under arrest for conspiracy, attempted kidnapping and fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As they handcuffed Richard, who seemed to have aged 10 years in a matter of minutes, Gregory felt his phone vibrate in his hand. A message from Carmen, a photo of Laura smiling on the beach holding a seashell. In the background, the golden Connecticut sunset painted the sky with hues of hope. The storm had passed. His daughter was safe. In the small seaside inn, Carmen watched Laura play in the sand, building clumsy castles with her small hands. The news of Richard and Eduardo's arrest had arrived a few hours ago, bringing a relief she didn't know was possible to feel. Beatrice had called to inform them that Soledad was safe, cooperating with the police. The evidence against Richard was solid: recordings, testimonies, falsified documents. Eduardo Marquez would face even more serious charges related to other crimes beyond the conspiracy against the Mannings. The taxi slowly approaching on the dirt road made Carmen's heart race. From the vehicle stepped Gregory Manning, his eyes immediately searching for his daughter on the beach. "Daddy!" Laura shouted when she saw him, getting up with the adorable instability of a 1-year-old and running towards him as best she could. Gregory scooped her up into his arms, lifting her high in the air before hugging her tightly. Carmen watched the scene from a distance, feeling a mixture of joy and uncertainty. Was her role in their lives over? Now that the danger had passed, was there a place for her in this family that against all odds she had grown to love? Gregory approached, still holding Laura, his face showing a range of emotions that was difficult to decipher. "Thank you," he said simply, "for saving her, for everything." Carmen nodded, unsure of what to say, what to feel. "It was the least I could do after being brave when I needed it most," he completed. "After risking your life for my daughter, after showing me that I can still trust someone." Their eyes met, both aware that something had changed between them. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something more fragile and at the same time stronger. Trust born from the ashes of betrayal, hope emerging from despair. What happens now? Carmen asked, her voice almost a whisper. Now? Gregory repeated, adjusting Laura in his arms as she played with his tie. Now we go home. The three of us. The three of us? Carmen couldn't hide her surprise. Gregory smiled, the first genuinely relaxed smile she had seen on his face since she met him. Unless you have other plans, Laura needs someone to take care of her, to love her the way you do. And I think I need to relearn how to trust, to live. You helped us start that process. Carmen felt tears well up in her eyes. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was an offer of a new beginning. A chance to be part of this family, no longer under false pretenses, but with honesty and open possibilities. I would like that very much, she replied simply. Laura, as if sensing the importance of the moment, reached her little hand out to Carmen, who took it with a smile. The three of them stood there, forming an imperfect but promising circle, as the sun began to set on the horizon, painting the sky with the colors of a new dawn. Chapter 4. New Beginnings. The return to New York City took place under the protective cloak of dawn. Gregory's car glided down the highway as the city awakened in the distance, its contours of concrete and glass gradually emerging from the morning mist. In the back seat, Laura slept peacefully, her head resting on Carmen's lap, who watched the landscape with a mixture of apprehension and hope. "Are you nervous?" Gregory asked, looking at her through the rearview mirror. Carmen smiled faintly. "A little. Everything changed so fast." "For the better, I hope," he replied, his eyes returning to the road. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled only by Laura's soft breathing and the distant sound of the radio the driver kept at a low volume. Carmen reflected on the events of the past weeks, how her life had been completely transformed, how she had stood on the brink of an abyss and somehow found redemption. The news of Richard and Eduardo's arrest was already circulating in the major newspapers, albeit with controlled details to protect Laura's privacy. "Businessman plots coup against partner, using immigrants as scapegoats," the headlines announced. Manning Textiles faced a public relations crisis, with stocks plummeting and nervous investors demanding explanations. "The lawyers want you to hold a press conference," Carmen commented, breaking the silence. "Beatrice mentioned it yesterday." Gregory sighed, his fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel. "I know it's necessary. The company needs stability. The employees are scared. But I'm not ready to talk about this publicly yet." "I understand," Carmen murmured. "Some wounds need time to heal before they're exposed to the world." Their eyes met briefly in the mirror. There was a new understanding between them, born not just from the traumatic events they had shared, but from something deeper, the mutual recognition of souls marked by loss and betrayal, yet still capable of trust. When they finally arrived at the building on the Upper East Side, Carmen felt a strange sense of homecoming. Despite knowing her position there had fundamentally changed, she was no longer just the hired nanny, the vulnerable immigrant used as a pawn in a cruel game. She was... what exactly? That question lingered in her mind as she rode the elevator up, Laura still asleep in her arms. Mrs. Celia greeted them at the apartment with teary eyes. The old housekeeper hugged Gregory for a long moment before turning to Carmen, her gaze conveying everything words could not. "Our girl is home," she said simply, stroking the hair of Laura, who was beginning to stir, where she always should have been. The days that followed brought a new routine, different from the previous one in subtle but significant ways. Gregory began working from home more often, converting part of his office into a space where he could monitor the company remotely while staying close to his daughter. Important meetings still required his physical presence, but he made a point of being home for dinner, for Laura's bath time, for the small daily milestones he had once completely missed. Carmen continued to care for Laura, but the dynamic between her and Gregory had transformed. Conversations that once were limited to reports about the child now stretched into other territories: books, music, dreams, fears. They discovered with mutual surprise that they shared more than just a love for little Laura. One Sunday afternoon, while the girl was taking her nap, Carmen found Gregory on the balcony, Contemplating the city, Soledad called, she said, approaching him. The judge accepted her plea deal. She'll serve community service and have to wear an ankle monitor for a year, but she won't go to prison. Gregory nodded, visibly relieved. Despite everything, he held no grudge against Soledad, who had been as much a victim as the accomplice in the scheme. And after, will she go back to Venezuela? No, Carmen smiled slightly. Beatrice offered her a job at the investigation agency. Apparently, Soledad has a natural talent for detecting lies, according to her. That's good, Gregory replied sincerely. Your sister deserves a second chance, just like the rest of us. Carmen leaned on the balustrade next to him, their arms almost touching. I've been thinking, maybe it's time for me to find my own place. Gregory turned to her, surprised. Why? I thought you were comfortable here. I am, she hurried to answer. But things have changed, Gregory. I'm not just the nanny you hired anymore. After everything that's happened, it would be more appropriate, perhaps. He watched her for a long moment, his dark eyes indecipherable. Is that what you want? Distance? Carmen hesitated, her heart racing. No, it's not distance I want. It's clarity. Clarity, he repeated, as if testing the word. About us, you mean? She nodded, unable to elaborate further, fearing she had crossed some invisible line. To her surprise, Gregory smiled, a soft, genuine smile that lit up his eyes in a way she had rarely witnessed. I've been thinking about that too, he admitted. About what we are now, what we could be. The moment was interrupted by the sound of the intercom. Mrs. Celia answered and soon came to inform them that Beatrice had arrived for their scheduled meeting. The investigator came by regularly, bringing updates on the case and helping prepare Gregory for the inevitable. Richard's trial, where he would have to testify against the man he once considered a brother. When they entered the living room, they found Beatrice already settled, her elegant posture contrasting with her serious expression. Beside her, a thick folder of documents. Good news, she announced as soon as Gregory and Carmen sat down. The district attorney has accepted all the evidence. Richard will be indicted not only for the conspiracy against you, but also for the death of the accountant, Maurice Porter, and for the financial fraud. And what about Eduardo? Carmen asked. He's negotiating a deal offering information on other crimes in exchange for a reduced sentence. But don't worry. Regardless of the deal, he won't see the light of day for the next 15 years at least. Gregory nodded, absorbing the information. A part of him still wondered how he had failed to see the signs, how he had trusted so completely in someone capable of such cruelty. There's one more thing, Beatrice continued, pulling an envelope from the folder. We located your father's original will, Gregory, without the fraudulent clause that Richard inserted. She handed him the document, which Gregory accepted with slightly trembling hands. It was like receiving a message from the past, a final contact with the father he had lost years ago. He left a letter too, Beatrice added softly. It was with the will in a separate safe deposit box at the bank. Richard never had access to it. The envelope containing the letter felt like it weighed a ton in Gregory's hands. He looked at Carmen, who nodded encouragingly. I'll leave you two alone, Beatrice said, standing up. There are technical details we need to discuss about the deposition, but that can wait until tomorrow. When the investigator left, Gregory remained staring at the envelope for long moments. Carmen stood up silently, preparing to leave as well to give him privacy. Stay, he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Please. She sat back down, her heart aching for the vulnerability she saw on his face. The powerful businessman, now reduced to a son longing for words from a long-lost father. Gregory opened the envelope carefully, revealing 2 sheets of paper covered in Anthony Manning's firm, angular handwriting. He began to read in a low voice, sharing the intimate moment with Carmen. My son, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means I have left this world before I could tell you in person the things a father should say to his son. Forgive me for this cowardice. I always thought there would be enough time. Gregory paused, his voice thick with emotion. Carmen instinctively moved closer, placing a hand on his. You have surpassed all my expectations, he continued reading. Not just as a businessman, but as a man. I have watched how you lead our business with integrity and vision, balancing tradition and innovation in a way I never could. Manning Textiles has flourished under your care, and that fills me with pride. There is, however, something that worries me. Richard Alvarez has been a valuable contributor to our company for many years, and I am grateful for his loyalty and hard work. But I have noticed a growing bitterness in him, an ambition that crosses ethical boundaries. I've tried to speak with him several times, to offer him a larger stake, recognition, but there is something inside him that cannot be satisfied. If my suspicions are correct, he may pose a danger to you and the company in the future. Trust your instincts, Gregory, and remember that a built empire is less important than a life well lived. Your mother and I always dreamed you would find a balance between work and personal happiness. My final piece of advice: do not let the past determine your future. Forgive when you can, move on when you must, and above all, find someone to share both the joys and the burdens of life. No professional success can compensate for the loneliness of an empty house. With all my love and trust, your father, Anthony. When he finished reading, Gregory had tears in his eyes, not of sadness, but of a strange peace he hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, an approval he hadn't known he was still seeking. Carmen squeezed his hand gently. "He knew," she said softly. "About Richard?" "Yes," Gregory replied, carefully folding the letter. "And I should have seen it too. So many signs, so many small moments." "Don't torture yourself with that," Carmen interrupted. "You trusted someone you loved like a brother. That's not weakness, Gregory. It's the greatest strength there is, the ability to trust, to love even after loss." He looked at her, truly looked at her, as if seeing her in a new light. "How did you become so wise at such a young age?" Carmen smiled sadly. "Maybe it's because I lost so much so early. My parents, my country, my safety. When you lose everything, you start to understand what really matters." At that moment, the sound of Laura's cry came through the baby monitor. Carmen stood up automatically, but Gregory gently stopped her by the wrist. "I'll get her," he said. "Stay here. We have a conversation to finish." In Laura's room, Gregory watched his now-awake daughter, her big, curious eyes fixed on him as she babbled in her own language, as if recounting the dreams she'd had during her nap. "Mama," she said clearly amidst the babbling, raising her little arms to be picked up. Gregory's heart tightened. Laura had been calling Carmen that occasionally in recent weeks. At first, he had felt a pang of guilt, as if he were betraying Patricia's memory. But over time, he understood it wasn't a replacement. It was simply the child recognizing the love she received, naming it in the only way she knew how. "Let's go see Carmen," he asked, picking her up. "She's waiting for us." When he returned to the living room, he found Carmen looking at a framed photograph on the bookshelf, a radiant, pregnant Patricia next to Gregory on a beach. The image he had kept hidden in a drawer for so long, and which he had finally found the courage to display again weeks ago. "She was beautiful," Carmen commented softly. "She was," Gregory agreed, approaching with Laura, who immediately reached for Carmen. "And generous. She would have liked you." Carmen accepted Laura, settling her in her lap with the naturalness of someone who had always done so. "How can you know?" "Because she valued authenticity above all else," he replied, sitting beside them. "And because I've never met anyone more authentic than you, Carmen Gonzalez." Something shifted in the air between them, a tension that had been building for weeks since their return from Connecticut. It wasn't just attraction, though that was present too. It was recognition, mutual understanding, possibility. "Gregory," Carmen began, hesitant, "I don't want to replace anyone. Not in Laura's life and not in yours. What Patricia meant to you both, that's sacred." "I know," he replied softly. "That's not what I'm looking for. It's not replacement, it's continuation, a new chapter." Laura, oblivious to the gravity of the moment, was playing with the simple necklace Carmen wore. A small, angel-shaped pendant Gregory had given her as a thank-you gift weeks ago. "I'm scared," Carmen admitted, the vulnerability evident in her voice, "that it's gratitude mistaken for something more. That one day you'll wake up and realize you made a mistake, that I'm just the Venezuelan nanny, the immigrant who happened to be there when you needed her." Gregory touched her face gently, making her look at him. "Is that what you think of yourself? After everything you've done, everything you've risked?" "Sometimes," she confessed, "it's hard to leave certain insecurities behind." "Then let me help with that," he said, his voice firm but gentle. Carmen Gonzalez, you saved my daughter. But you did so much more than that. You brought me back to life when I didn't even know I was still lost. And I'm not just talking about Richard's plan. I'm talking about how you, day after day, showed me that it was possible to love again, to trust again, to live again. Tears glistened in Carmen's eyes, reflecting the soft afternoon light streaming through the windows. I don't know what the future holds for us, Gregory continued. No one does. But I'd like to find out if you're willing. I am, she replied simply, her voice little more than a whisper. The moment was sealed not with a passionate, cinematic kiss, but with something equally powerful. Laura, sensing the emotion between the adults, stretched out to hug them both simultaneously, creating a perfect circle of three people bound by something stronger than blood or chance. A family born from the ashes of tragedy, rebuilt with the imperfect bricks of redemption and hope. 6 months passed, bringing changes for everyone. Richard's trial had begun, with overwhelming evidence against him. Eduardo Marquez was fulfilling his plea deal, revealing a network of corporate crimes that extended far beyond Manning Textiles, implicating high-level executives across the country. Soledad flourished under Beatrice's mentorship, discovering talents she never imagined she possessed. Her knowledge of Spanish and her experience as an immigrant became invaluable in identifying and protecting other vulnerable people used in similar criminal schemes. Manning Textiles was undergoing its own process of healing and transformation. Gregory implemented structural changes, bringing in transparency and creating an ethics board that included employees from all levels of the company. The expansion into the South continued, now with an additional focus on sustainability and social responsibility. As for Gregory and Carmen, they moved forward with the caution of those who know the value and fragility of second chances. She continued to care for Laura, but now she was also studying early childhood education at the university, an old dream she finally had the opportunity to pursue. They had agreed to give their relationship time, building a solid foundation before taking bigger steps. One Saturday morning, while Laura, now 1.5, played on the living room rug under Mrs. Celia's watchful eye, Carmen found Gregory in the office working on some documents. "Working already?" she asked, entering with 2 cups of coffee. He smiled, accepting the drink gratefully. "Actually, I'm finishing something personal." Carmen leaned over to see the document he was filling out. It was a form for the Casa Esperanza Foundation, an organization supporting refugee and immigrant children. "It's a project I've been thinking about for a while," Gregory explained. "Using part of the company's profits to create a shelter and education center for immigrant children, so that no other Carmen or Soledad has to submit to degrading situations just to survive in a new country." Carmen felt her heart swell in her chest. This was how Gregory showed his feelings, not just with words or gestures, but with concrete actions that reflected deep understanding. "That's wonderful," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I want you to be a part of it," he continued, taking her hand. "Not just as a supporter, but as the director of the educational program, if you want. No one understands the needs of these children better than you." Carmen was speechless, touched by the implicit trust in his invitation. I don't know if I'm qualified. "You're getting your degree in education," he reminded her. "And you have something more important than any diploma. Real experience, genuine compassion. The rest you can learn along the way." Before she could answer, they were interrupted by Laura, who came running into the office with her still unsteady steps, followed by a slightly breathless Mrs. Celia. "This girl gets faster every day," the housekeeper exclaimed, smiling despite her fatigue. Laura climbed into Carmen's lap with the ease of someone who does it daily, snuggling between her and Gregory as if that were exactly where she belonged. "Mama," she said clearly, looking at Carmen before turning to Gregory. "Daddy, story!" Gregory exchanged a look with Carmen. These simple moments had become precious to them both, a ritual that cemented the bond between the three of them. "Which story do you want today, Princess?" he asked. Laura thought for a moment with that comical seriousness only children can muster. "The angel," she finally decided, touching the pendant Carmen still wore. Carmen smiled, adjusting the girl in her lap. It was a story they had created together, not the real story of betrayal and danger they would one day tell Laura when she was older, but a softened version, about disguised angels who appear when we need them most. Once upon a time, Carmen began, there was a little princess who lived in a very tall castle. With Daddy, Laura interrupted, as she always did at this part. Yes, with Daddy, Carmen continued, sharing a knowing smile with Gregory. They were very happy, but sometimes Daddy was sad, because he missed the queen who had gone to live among the stars. Laura nodded solemnly, though she was still too young to truly understand the concept of death. To her biological mother was almost a mythical figure, present in photographs and stories, but without the pain of absence she might one day feel. One day, Gregory continued, taking over, a young woman from a faraway land appeared at the castle. No one knew it, but she was actually an angel in disguise, sent to protect the little princess and help the king smile again. And they lived happily ever after? Laura asked, who, despite knowing the story by heart, always asked the same question at the end. Gregory looked at Carmen, his eyes conveying more than words could express. We're writing that part of the story every day, my love, he replied, reaching out to intertwine his fingers with Carmen's. But it seems so. We're on the right path to happily ever after. 3 years passed since that conversation in the office. The Casa Esperanza Foundation had become a reality, helping hundreds of immigrant children find education, shelter, and hope in the United States. Carmen, now with her degree in education and pursuing a master's in inclusive education, directed the educational program with the same passion and dedication she had shown protecting Laura years ago. Richard had served 2 years of his sentence and would face at least 8 more before any possibility of parole. Eduardo Marquez, after cooperating extensively with the authorities, had entered the witness protection program, disappearing from their lives forever. Soledad had become a promising investigator, specializing in crimes involving immigrants and human trafficking. The relationship between the Gonzalez sisters, once marked by a mutual dependence born of desperation, now blossomed into an adult friendship between 2 strong, independent women. As for Gregory, Laura, and Carmen, they had finally made official what had been a reality for a long time. The wedding was a simple ceremony on the beach in that Connecticut town, the place that years before had served as a refuge during the storm. Laura, now 4½, was the most enthusiastic flower girl ever seen, scattering petals down the aisle with the same determination she brought to everything in life. At the makeshift altar by the sea, Gregory looked at the woman who had turned his tragedy into redemption. When Patricia died, he said during his vows, I thought I would never be able to love again, that part of me had been buried with her. And then you appeared, not to replace what I had lost, but to show me that the human heart has an infinite capacity for expansion, that it's possible to honor the past while embracing the future. Carmen, radiant in a simple lace dress, responded with her own promise. I came into this family under circumstances none of us could have imagined, with fear, with guilt, carrying a burden that seemed impossible to bear. You and Laura not only forgave me, but you showed me that redemption isn't just a pretty word. It's a real possibility for those who have the courage to start over. I promise to honor this second chance every day of our lives together. Mrs. Celia, now officially retired but still present in their family life as the grandmother Laura never knew on her father's side, couldn't hold back tears of joy. Beside her, Soledad and Beatrice watched the scene with emotional smiles. 2 strong women whose unlikely friendship was born from the same turbulent circumstances that now culminated in this celebration of love. After the ceremony, while the guests celebrated and Laura ran along the beach with other children, Gregory and Carmen walked to the water's edge, their bare feet in the warm sand. Do you know what I'm thinking? He asked, looking at the horizon where the sun was beginning to set. What? She replied, resting her head on his shoulder. About how unpredictable life is. How the worst storms sometimes lead us exactly where we're meant to be. Carmen smiled, remembering his father's letter, the words that had become a sort of mantra for them both. Forgive when you can. Move on when you must. I think your father would be proud, she said softly. Not just for the company's success, but especially for the courage to rebuild your life. Our little daily miracle, Gregory replied, looking at Laura, who was now running towards them, her dark hair blowing in the wind, her smile lighting up a face of mixed features, where Patricia's heritage blended harmoniously with his. "Mama!" "Daddy!" the girl shouted, throwing herself into their arms. "Come see the sand castle I made?" As they followed their daughter down the beach, hand in hand, Carmen reflected on the long, improbable path that had brought her here. From the impoverished streets of Caracas to the golden beaches of Connecticut. From the desperation that nearly led her to commit the unforgivable to the love that finally set her free. There were scars, of course. There always would be. But there was also beauty in those imperfections, in the cracks filled with the gold of experience and overcoming. As an old Japanese proverb she had recently learned said, "Kintsugi, the art of making what was broken more beautiful." Laura waited impatiently, pointing to an impressive sand construction decorated with colorful shells and small twigs. "It's our castle," she announced proudly, "where the king, the queen, and the princess live happily ever after." Gregory and Carmen exchanged an emotional look. In her innocence, Laura had created the perfect metaphor for their journey, a castle built not on perfect foundations, but on sand that had weathered storms, been shaped by time, transformed by nature. Fragile perhaps to those who don't understand, but infinitely more beautiful for its history. "It's the most beautiful castle I've ever seen," Carmen said, kneeling beside her daughter. "And the strongest," Gregory added, joining them in the sand. Together, the three of them continued to build, adding towers, bridges, paths. It didn't matter that the tide would eventually wash it all away. The value was in the present moment, in the shared joy, in the hands working together to create something new from what life offered. Because, in the end, it is not the castles that remain, but the love that builds them. It is not possessions that define a family, but the stories they share, the fears they face together, the second chances they bravely embrace. And as the sun slowly set on the horizon, painting the sky with golden and rosy hues, three silhouettes remained on the beach, a man, a woman, and a child. Three lives intertwined by fate, by choice, and by that mysterious force that some call coincidence, others destiny, and others still simply love.